The top of the hour, 2 o'clock, and it is time for our Selling Security Services series. Let me change this screen because we're actually starting now. My name is Al Alper. Glad everybody could join us today. I'm actually really excited about today. I'm excited for two reasons. One is this network level monitoring is one of my favorite elements of the security stack. Actually, that's not true. It's my second favorite element of the security stack in a security solution. My first one is the risk assessment. The risk assessment is by far my favorite because of the value proposition that it brings to both you as an organization that sells security solutions, as well as to the client who receives the benefit of those solutions. And the reason for that is Legion. I have a whole risk assessment webinar that we did. That was actually our very first webinar in this series. If you haven't seen it, go back on the website and take a look at it. We got some terrific feedback from partners and prospects and individuals who happened to take a look at it and got a lot of value out of that. So anyway, that's back on the website. Take a look at it. Today we're talking about network level monitoring, and the other reason that I'm really excited about this is because we have a good friend who's joining us today that we're going to be interviewing in a little while, Jason Whitehurst. He is one of the smartest guys in security that you'll get to know on this call, and he's really employing these solutions in market today and doing very well to boot. And so we're going to be interviewing him in a little bit, assuming I can figure out how to pass control to him or at least add him as a panelist on this call. That notwithstanding, let's jump into this. So today we're talking about network level monitoring. And some of you may or may not know what that's all about. The title of it is network level monitoring. It shouldn't be your check engine light, and I'll explain that in a moment. We're going to cover what it is. We're going to cover how it's used. And that phone a friend piece is where we bring Jason into the call, and then a plan of execution, and then we'll take any questions. Jason's going to stay on to the end so he can answer any questions as well. Make sure that he's out there, but I'll do that in a little bit. So anyway, like all of our webinars, we always start with think bigger. Why do I always start with this? I start with it because MSPs tend to think with a product mindset. They look at the solutions and services that they deliver, and frankly, so do MSSPs. Not all of them, but the smaller MSSPs do the same thing. They think about the solutions and the products and services they deliver, and they sell in market like that. And you need to think bigger. Because when you think bigger, you're not selling products, you're selling solutions. I was on a call earlier today. I had this exact discussion with the group that I was on the call with earlier, an accountability group that I coach. And we talked about what their security products were that they were trying to sell, and I stopped them dead in their tracks. Because the reality is the moment that you go in market and you're selling security on a product basis, you are doing two things to hurt yourself. And frankly, you're doing your clients and or prospects a huge disservice. The first thing you're doing to hurt yourself is you are saying that a security solution is a commodity, something you could buy off the shelf. You can buy this AV product or that AV product, this firewall or that firewall, this layer 2 or 3 device or that layer 2 or 3 device. And so you commoditize the conversation. And the moment you commoditize the conversation, the second disservice you do is you put yourself into a bidding war against yourself because you've turned the conversation from solution to product, from value to price. What do I mean by that? I mean that the moment you give your client or prospect an opportunity to measure you based on the product that you're selling, they can go find somebody who's going to sell the same product for probably less money. because to them, they don't necessarily understand the value proposition you bring to the table when you use that product relative to the monitoring, management, remediation, mitigation, et cetera, that you bring. And you have to separate that out and start explaining yourself. And you don't want to do that, because the reality is you're selling a solution, the services that you bring to the table that you juxtapose, put up alongside of the products that you bring to the table. Those services and product together form a solution that you bring that makes you an invaluable partner in their business. And so when you sell products, you've commoditized the conversation. You're allowing yourself to be priced out against potential competitors. Because if you're selling Sophos Intercept X and they find somebody else selling Sophos Intercept X and they're selling it for, let's say, $30 a month less than you're selling it, you have to explain why your services are different than them. You don't want to have a conversation like that. Because the truth of the matter is there is no MSSP or MSSP that's going to walk, MSP or MSSP, excuse me, that's going to walk through the door and say, yeah, we suck less. That's not going to happen. Everybody's going to walk through the door and say, we give great service. We're the best in the business. Our engineers have X years of experience. And so how can they compare you to the other? Man, maybe some of them know you, and so maybe that's the hurdle you've gotten over, that trust barrier, which is the hardest barrier to overcome. So maybe you've gone past that already, and then you've gone from a prospect to a warm lead to a hot lead, and so now you're in the hot lead piece of the sales funnel. But that notwithstanding, that's not where most people are going to be, nor where most people are going to end up if they're selling products. And so you want to sell a solution. It doesn't matter what the underlying products of those solutions are. What matters is that the solution that you bring to the table is one that keeps them safe, secure, and protected in this very dangerous world of cybersecurity. So really good MSSPs think in terms of solutions. And that's that second S in MSSP. I know that everybody says managed security services provider, but you're really a managed security solutions provider. It's not just the services or not just the products that you bring to the table. It is the aggregate of those products and services that make you a better MSSP than somebody else who comes through the door. Certainly a better MSSP than an MSP who comes through the door. Because an MSP sells products. They don't sell solutions in the security space. Some will say they do. The truth of the matter is they don't. I've seen this all day long, every single day. They come in and they say, look at the great AV, look at our great firewall, look at, clients do not care about the products you bring to the table. They care about the solutions that you bring to the table. So if you want to sell security, you want to sell security solutions. You want to put together a product suite and a service suite that is bulletproof, rock solid. And you're selling a solution, not a product and service. So what is network level monitoring? A lot of people talk about it. Some people talk about doing it with their RMM, which to some degree you can. You can use your remote monitoring and management tool, whatever you happen to be using, whether it's Kaseya, Continuum, GFI, or what's Automate Now and not LabTech, or whatever the other RMMs out there. You can do some degree of network level monitoring with them, network monitoring as it's otherwise known. But that only does a piece of it because they're not really very good or designed to do a full breadth network level monitoring. And so you need a network level monitoring tool that's going to do that for you. For instance, some of the things that an RMM won't do in network level monitoring that a pure NLM tool will do for you is it will provide a network map. One of the most basic functions of an NLM product is that it provides a network map, an overview of the whole network. And so you definitely need an NLM when you go in market. Whether you're an MSP or an MSSP, you should be using an NLM tool at the very least for discovery. But that notwithstanding, MSPs differ from MSSPs in the way in which they look at the tool, what it is, what it does for them, and how they use it. And so most MSPs use that to really outline what's in the network, okay? And for them, because they think they can do that with their tool set, such as their RMM, or maybe they're using something like Rapid Fire Tools Network Detective, whatever the case may be, they think they don't need an NLM. They think it's a nice to have. And in fact, most MSPs don't use NLMs at all because they believe they can get the information they think, capital letters, THINK, underline that they think they need from tools like their RMM and Rapid Fire Tools. And so they look at an NLM product as a nice to have. And therefore, for them, it becomes a cost center and not a value proposition. Where MSSPs understand that it is an essential element in their tool set. It is part of their arsenal of tools with which they defend an environment. They understand an environment. They have something called visibility into that environment. In fact, NLMs are an indispensable element of an MSSP's tool set because it is truly the only element in their tool set that gives them pure visibility into the network. You cannot do that with any other product on the market. You can get maps from other products that are on the market. You can identify assets from other tools that are on the market. I'll use Rapid Fire as an example, and I don't mean to put them down. They're a great product for what they do, but they're not an NLM. When you run that qualifying tool, it is effectively a snapshot in time of what it saw on the network when that happened, when that tool was run. And so you get great output, a robust amount of data that it puts out. But what about tomorrow? What happens when tomorrow that somebody comes in and plugs in an errant access point because they don't have a network drop on the far end of the building, and so they stand up an access point to connect wirelessly or to facilitate additional Ethernet connections using a Wi-Fi in bridge mode, and all of a sudden all these new devices appear and potentially they're rogue devices. Well, the Rapid Fire tool product that you ran the day before to run your assessment knows nothing about what just happened the next day. And that lack of visibility because of a purpose-built tool like Rapid Fire, which is designed for those one-off elements, don't satisfy the need of pure visibility. And that's not, I mean, they have another product I know called Cyberhawk, and that does provide some additional visibility. But again, it is not continuous monitoring. That is not what it's designed to do. NLMs are designed from the ground up to provide that pure visibility into the network. No other tool can do this for you. No other tool can give you the level of insight and depth as to what's going on the network, in the network, etc. And that's why to an MSSP, a managed security solutions provider, it is an essential element of their tool belt. So how is it used? And I continue to compare MSPs to MSSPs because it's important to understand the difference. And the difference is one of mindset. It's also one of how they view their responsibility to the client, an element of mindset too, don't get me wrong, but it's how they view their responsibility when delivering services. MSSPs take their responsibility of guarding and protecting their clients' environment, the security envelope, very, very seriously. And they do so because they know that they are being entrusted with perhaps their second most important asset in their client's life, their first being their family and friends. This is their livelihood. This is how they feed their family and the families they employ. And MSSPs look at that and take it very seriously, their responsibility at protecting it. And that's not to say that MSPs don't feel that same obligation. They just don't understand the security space well enough to understand what that means when they've taken on that burden. It's not because they're not smart enough, or it's not because they don't study enough. It's because in the narrow world of MSP, you're delivering a variety of services that to some degree have become commoditized over the last 15 or 20 years since the term MSP came into being. But really because the vendors who serve the MSP market are equally as guilty at causing that commoditization. And therefore, there's a very small amount of difference between MSPs, very small amount of difference between products, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, an MSP is going to use an NLM if they use it at all. We said it was a nice to have to begin with. Most don't use it. And when I say most, that is more than 85% of MSPs do not use that. The number I'm getting that from Gartner, but the truth of the matter is I personally think it's higher. Now, they survey a larger audience than I do. We're up here in the Northeast. And I know many, many MSPs up here in the Northeast. And I can say to a person, almost none of them use an NLM. And those that do use it for very narrow purposes, almost like they use the rapid fire tools of the world as if it was purpose built for one thing, such as a network map. So maybe they use it much like they would use a rapid fire to not just pull in what assets are there at the time, but also put together a map of the network, literally a visualization of where things are and how they connect. They might also use it to benchmark devices. NLMs are terrific at this. So NLMs can drill into a device and tell you everything that's going on with that device at the hardware level and at the application level, because it will report out at that level. And because it can do that, you can set a benchmark of how those devices perform today. So an MSP might do that during an initial audit phase, or maybe even an annual or routine audit that they might do perhaps before a QBR or before an annual TBR or whatever the case may be. And they may look at those benchmarks and say, okay, this is how the system performs per se. And maybe they set that as the baseline against which they measure future performance, not necessarily measured again by an NLM, and perhaps it is. But again, if they're snapshots in time, points in time, all you're saying is how did it work when I ran it then, and how does it work now? What happened in between the bookends of those runs? Nobody knows, and you can't know unless you're using an NLM, because again, RMM tools are not NLM tools, and you're not going to be able to monitor the same way. To get to the level of monitoring of an NLM using your RMM, you would need to layer on dozens of applications. Think about it this way. You're monitoring a server with your RMM tool. How are you monitoring the RAID controller? You've got two choices. You can build a monitor set that looks at the event log and reads for hardware failure in hopes of that hardware failure throwing off a unique event ID and or with unique text in the body that your monitor set can pick it up and throw an alert to you. So all the manual labor that goes into configuring that monitor set. Alternatively, you could add something. Intel has a RAID monitor. Dell Open Manage is another one. And then you can add those layers of additional software that report out to you. Either they report out to you by way of email, or maybe they're adding additional event log information that you can then write event monitor sets for, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But look at all the overhead you're adding to utilize the RMM, the labor that goes into that, the effort that goes into that. You change it, you got to do it all over again. You change the type of hardware, the type of controller. Depending on what it is, you've got to add layers of application and layers of labor to that. What an NLM does, it uses something called the WMI, the Windows Management Interface, assuming you're using a Windows server for a moment, or SNMP traps, or syslogs, and it's getting that information at literally the kernel level. It's telling this, the system is saying, we have a problem with this RAID controller, and here's what the problem is, because the RAID controller is reporting into that interface. It's how the applications we talked about a moment ago know what's going on. The applications are getting the same thing from this mystery RAID controller. But the WMI interface on a Windows server, for example, is getting that information directly as well, without any application layered on top of that. And an NLM directly speaks to the WMI, the Windows Management Interface, and picks up all that information and reports it out. And it does it on a continual basis. And that's where an NLM tool is different than an RMM tool, and all the labor that doesn't have to set it and forget it on the NLM for all intents and purposes. So again, an MSP is using it to benchmark things, do ad hoc resource utilization and device diagnostics, similar to the example I just gave you. Anything that they can read vis-a-vis that level of reporting at WMI, SNMP traps, syslogs, etc., an NLM is going to report out. And so MSPs run them once in a while when they use them, which is rarely. And they do that, again, for network map, device benchmarking, resource utilization, because they're trying, in resource utilization and device diagnostics, a problem has reared its ugly head, and now they're trying to investigate what the problem is. And so these are one-off instances where they may employ an NLM to do that. Where an MSSP uses this, again, we said this is part of its core set of critical tools that it employs. And so an MSSP is constantly monitoring everything that's going on the network. And they are paying attention to the NLM, and the MSSP who's employing it is on the lookout for everything, constantly aware of, being alerted for events such as excessive bandwidth, excessive CPU or memory usage or leakage, unauthorized access to systems, and et cetera, et cetera. This list is not in any way, shape, or form exhaustive, because of what an NLM is capable of doing is almost infinite relative to monitoring management. Think about for a second, when you're monitoring and managing all the elements of a network, what you're doing. And NLM is doing that for you, vis-a-vis the probes that are deployed, et cetera, and you are just being alerted on those elements of the network that are out of tolerance levels that you've set when you set it up. So you set your baseline and tolerance levels, and then it alerts you when it goes out of band on those, if you would. So an MSSP is going to begin to employ their NLM tool by baselining the environment. Now, this is not dissimilar to an MSP. We said that to begin with. Some MSPs who use it are going to go out there and they're going to do a network map. That's that network topology element of that. They're going to do a network map to see what's out there on the network. And we said you can do that with some other tools that are out there, including your RMM, by the way. If your RMM has some sort of SNMP monitor and or some domain watch, if you would, you can use your RMM to gather some of this information. It won't give you a map like you see on your screen, but it will certainly give you those items you're seeing on your screen, assuming they have visibility into that. You get a traffic flow diagram. You can't get that with an RMM or a purpose-built tool like RapidFire. So you can get a traffic flow diagram. You can see how data is moving around the network. So you can see if it's going from a particular endpoint through a switch to a server, maybe to another switch, whatever the case may be. So an NLM will give you what the traffic flow looks like. And this is what an MSP uses it to do, to see how is traffic flowing around the network. Where are we seeing performance bottlenecks? That's what a performance gate is. What does the performance look like of the network as packets flow through it, as traffic flows through it? How are the switches and the ports of those switches being utilized? Where are we seeing an excessive overload? Maybe there are too many machines that are daisy-chained off that switch. Whatever the case may be, the NLM tool is going to allow you to gate the performance and benchmark it so you know what you're walking into before you quote and propose a solution for your prospect or client. Because you will sell security solutions to your client. So this is not just a tool used on prospects. Anytime you move up to the security solutions level, that is completely something you want to do for existing clients as well as for prospecting purposes. Device configurations, we already talked about the fact that this has the ability to drill into devices. You know exactly what's not only what the hardware looks like, but the way the hardware is configured to behave and the way the hardware is configured to work. And that's available to you as well when you utilize an NLM tool. And then asset identification, as I've said, you can do that with some purpose-built tools, but everything connected to the network. So maybe, and Jason will talk about this in a little bit, I know, but maybe that you walk into an environment where someone said, well, we've got 5 servers, we've got 35 workstations, we've got 10 printers, and 2 wireless access points. And when you run your NLM, you find, in fact, that they actually have 3 additional access points because someone set one up in their office because the signal from the AP that was way down the other end of the hall was too weak. So they brought in their own Linksys Wi-Fi router, plugged it into the network jack, threw their computer into the back of that, and now they're running a rogue wireless access point on the other end of the building that the C-suite or the IT department never knew existed. You can pick that up with an NLM, and it will identify it, it will drill into it, and even tell you what it is. Make, model, serial number, how it's configured, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so an MSSP begins by baselining the system. What's out there? How is it being used? How is it configured? How is it performing? Once they do that, they identify all those elements. There's concurrence with the prospect or client. Yes, this is what we have. Yes, this is what we're looking to monitor, manage, and secure. And then they'll begin to identify and prioritize. What do I mean by that? So they've identified every element. They're looking for the critical systems and access paths. Access paths are who needs access, what's the route to get there? Is it internal, external, departmental, etc.? Those are the critical systems, those that are required for the business to be up and running. Think in terms of business continuity for a moment. You're then going to segment off the tertiary systems, those that are necessary but not critical. So think maybe the shipping system is necessary but not critical to the environment because there's a way to do that off system. Or maybe the CRM is tertiary, not critical. Still need it, but it's not critical to making sure customers are satisfied. And so tertiary systems and their access paths are identified. And the tangential systems that are attached, but they're neither tertiary nor critical. Some of them may be important and necessary. Others may be rogue and problematic and present a threat to the organization. And then finally, you're going to do something called a business impact analysis. If you don't know what that is, you should know what that is. Because if you're selling security, this is also a key element of your security solution arsenal. Because what you're wanting to do is look at all of these systems and evaluate them relative to the impact on the business, so then you can begin to define A, how you're going to protect it, and B, how you're going to ensure continuity. And business continuity is a significant and critical element of a managed security solution provider's solution set. Once you've mapped all of that out, you've identified and prioritized, you know where everything is, you know who has to have access to it, when they have to have access to it, and how they need access to it. Does it only need to be on network? Can it be off network? Can we come through the web? Whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter. Once you prioritize and once you identified and prioritized, then you can begin to establish the parameters to how you're going to be monitoring and managing this. What are those that the baselines are acceptable? What thresholds within that baseline is acceptable? And then when it falls outside, who gets alerted and how you get alerted? So you're defining normal. Again, that first part of the baselining, the performance gate, says, okay, this is normal. Now, I know you're thinking, well, he said we're going to run this and do a performance gate. How can you figure that out in one run of that? Well, the key to that is you're not running it. It's not one and done. That's not a purpose-built appliance to do once. So Jason will explain how he uses it, and he's more typical relative to this than others. You're going to run a continual monitoring of the environment for a period of time to set that performance gate. That's what's going to define normal for you. Because you don't want to run something plugged in for maybe an hour or two, and that happens to be at their highest trafficked time of day. And then you're setting benchmarks for their highest traffic time of day when 90% of their day is substantially less traffic, and therefore you don't need to worry about, you need to worry about the high times of day, don't get me wrong, but that's not normal. Normal is a weighted average of all of that. That defines normal. Your thresholds that you've identified are your highs and lows. And so you know normal, and then you have your thresholds. What's our highest? What's our lowest? And then from that, you're going to say, okay, we're going to configure alerting that when it falls outside the high or outside the low, we want to alert. We want to do something with that. Sometimes it's just an alert. Maybe there's actually some automated remediation that goes on in the background. If you're tied into your RMM tool and you've built some automation around that. But unless and until you know what normal looks like, and unless and until you know what those thresholds are, you have no idea how to set the parameters for alerting and remediation, for monitoring and management, which is what you're doing. Similarly, because you've identified access, you're also setting those same alerts and rules up to identify when unauthorized systems or people, that's right, systems can have access as well. When unauthorized systems and people gain access to the system or attempt to gain access to the system. Once you have all of that, you're going to want to configure your devices and rule sets. So you're going to have to configure your devices to report the information you want into the NLM. And then the rule sets for the alerting at all. Then you're going to go back to the environment and you're going to reset. What do I mean by that? Well, you may find through this entire deliberative process that some systems are woefully inadequate. We talked a little bit earlier about that switch, that only through the NLM do you even know that the switch is being exhausted. It's dropping packets left and right because it's got a flood of traffic coming in over that particular port. You wouldn't know that without the NLM. So you're going to go back and you're going to reset the infrastructure, meaning bring the infrastructure up to be able to perform at baseline normal and accommodate the thresholds that you find acceptable. So again, using the switch as a simple example, a layer 2 or 3 switch is a simple example, you may find yourself having to upgrade the switch or having to segment the network to accommodate that additional bandwidth so that the switch is not being exhausted. Perhaps you're finding CPU overutilization when you did this. And so perhaps you need to upgrade the CPU or upgrade a system. And so this is what I mean by infrastructure reset. You are going to reset the system to accommodate its performance at normal while taking into account threshold. You'll find that you won't have to build the system for maximum threshold, but building the system for normal may still be somewhat inadequate. And the NLM might have discovered that, in fact, the system that they have in place is woefully inadequate, and that's what's causing high CPU or memory usage, which is causing significant performance problems. And so you're going to reset the infrastructure, reconfiguring systems, how the assets report, making sure that they're configured and conforming to the different access paths that were identified as critical, as tertiary, etc. So there's a whole lot of work to do relative to resetting the infrastructure. This is terrific project work, by the way. Whether you do that as part of the onboarding process or otherwise, that's going to be entirely up to you, the way you sell your services. But there's a terrific amount of project work that's going to come of this, because when you manage the environment, you want to make sure that you're able to manage the environment. If you're letting the client dictate to you what the network should look like, then what are you doing there? They brought you in because you're the heart surgeon. They shouldn't be telling you how to do bypass surgery. And so you're telling them this is what it needs to look like to perform the way they expect it to perform. Okay, let me bring in Jason Whitehurst. Just give me a moment here. I just want to make sure Jason is out there. I know he's there somewhere. Right, there he is. Let me see you. Jason, are you out there with us?
I certainly am.
How are you, sir? Great to talk to you today.
I'm doing great.
Excellent.
Another good
So those of you that don't know Jason, you should get to know him. You'll get to know him a little bit on this call. He's one of the smarter guys I know in security, and I don't say that lightly. And I've had the pleasure of getting to know him, and he's a terrific guy. Hope I didn't embarrass you too much. How about a little bit of something about yourself so everybody on the call knows who you are?
Yeah, real quick. I've been in the MSP business about 15 years. About 3-4 years ago, I decided to fundamentally change what I was doing in the MSP space, mostly because of the commoditization of standardized MSP business, the reduction in margins, and the increase in the amount of expectations. And so I decided to blend the MSP service with security services for these clients because A, I like to keep competition out, and B, one of my biggest drivers and motivators with clients is increasing revenue with existing clients. A lot of times I see, and I talk to a number of MSPs, probably 3 a week, And one of the questions I always bring is, have you exhausted the amount of available revenue extension with your existing client? And the answer is almost unilaterally no. And so my focus has been on security. It's been on protecting these medium-sized and smaller and medium and little larger organizations, and doing it in a way where I can constructively say to the business owners and the decision makers, yes, you are protected to the extent that we can protect you. It's too dangerous today to say that you're an MSSP without the appropriate resources. So that's what I've been doing late.
Excellent. So as I was saying earlier on the call, MSP space has effectively become commoditized. You saw that yourself, and you bled into the security space naturally as a way to differentiate yourself.
Right, and in a way to, in a way to make sure that I was growing the amount of either direct or what I call referral or residual revenue with existing clients, to make sure that I was getting as much revenue per client as possible through an extension of services and keeping out the competition. And security was the logical next step for that.
Terrific. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. I know this is a security-centric webinar, but it's important. That the overall theme is selling security. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your sales process.
So the first thing that I will say is, number one, we do not allow the discussion of solutions or products until we have completed an exhaustive assessment of the potential client's infrastructure. And that means running an NLM for at least a business week, completing a business impact assessment, a verbal business impact assessment with the business owners, and having them tell us what they think is most critical in the organization, and then completing the NLM assessment as well as the business impact assessment, and then any other questions or issues that they may think they're having, and come back to them with a recommendation that is composed of what we pulled from the NLM, which I can tell you, on more often than not, we find things there that were not expressed to us in the first discussion about what needed to be covered or protected.
So when you're looking for prospects, so that's awesome stuff. So obviously you go through that process and you do a full due diligence and assessment, if you would, running the NLM for a week. They're not one-off runs like we talked about earlier. A lot of the people on the call are busy trying to figure out how to sell security. What do you look for? What are the characteristics you look for in a prospect that you'd be selling security services to?
So I think the big thing that we look for is, first is a client beholden to a regulated industry? Number one. Number two, for us, is we focus on a vertical that we know that we can deliver a service to. So we look for, is it a regulated industry? Are there regulatory compliance guidelines that we can follow in assessments to help better determine whether they're following those guidelines? And obviously they are not, almost across the board. The second thing that we look for, if it's a completely new prospect, is whether or not they recognize the need for security. And oftentimes those are institutions who have experienced an incident of late and have been scared into realizing that security is just as critical as day-to-day infrastructure. And then if we're not looking at those pieces, we're looking for folks who have expressed, either through partnership agreements or another MSP needing some help or whatever, where the client understands the value proposition of a security solution.
Okay, awesome. And I love that you talk about compliance, because the truth of the matter is I don't know a single regulation, a compliance regulation out there that doesn't have NLM, network monitoring, as an element, a requirement, in fact, of the regulation. whether it is GDPR or CCPA or New York's DFS or HIPAA or GLBA, all of these regulations speak to the need to do network monitoring. And as I said earlier, folks, network monitoring is not RMM.
No,
RMMs are.
No, I mean, KPMG won't consider an assessment complete without a full NLM assessment.
Right.
And so these regulatory guidelines require NLM. And for us, let me give you some really quick and these are real world examples. We got called into an institution to do a full assessment. They had a security incident, hadn't clearly defined what the security incident was. They just knew that they had some sort of infiltration. The MSP had been resident for 3 years. We discovered a secondary wireless network from Extreme Networks, which was appropriate for the business in the warehouse. However, the warehouse installed it without telling IT. The MSP had no idea it was there. And that's how they got into the environment, through that unsecured network that was in place for the warehouse. And because the MSP was not running an NLM and not scanning the subnets outside of the known range, they had no idea it was there. And that's how the incident happened. We see that frequently, that type of thing, where there's a device that the MSP didn't know about, the client knew about, and assumed the MSP knew about it. And so those assumptions what gets people in trouble.
Yeah, that's a perfect example where an MSP just has an inadequate tool set. They don't have it's not because they don't want to necessarily do the job, but the traditional tool set of an MSP is not equipped to identify that, at least not identify it in a timely fashion. Because if they had, that MSP would have identified that. So walk me through, if you would. So you've got you've gone through this funnel, you've moved the prospect down the funnel, and now you're going to go through a sales process. They want to hear. So talk to me about the pre-sale, from discovery, what output you use, et cetera. Talk about that for a little bit and how you're leveraging NLM.
So the first thing that we do, and it was something that I recognized a few years ago, in staying in touch, with guys like Al and other guys who think a little differently, I started to recognize, really through some mentoring, but I didn't pick it up on my own, but I started to put the pieces together that I was going to win the deal, even if I was more expensive, which I frequently am, if I can build equity with the decision maker as quickly as possible in the short pre-sale cycle that I'm allowed and given their attention. So I then take situation A. I need to build equity with the decision maker such that they trust me to recommend the solution. And even if I'm more expensive, they'll trust I'll do an excellent job. So then I walk that backwards. What does that mean? That means that in the sales close, I have to be able to present graphically, I have to be able to present technically, I have to be able to present financially what it is that they have in their organization, what's most critical, what is not critical, what exists that they may not know about, what is unacceptable. What I mean by unacceptable: layer 2 switches that have a fan out of 5 PCs and they want to do VoIP, that kind of thing. Switches with firmware that's 5, 6, 7 years old. All their switch ports are open and accessible, even if nothing's plugged into it and nothing's locked down. That's basic stuff that's going to get me in trouble. It's going to get them in trouble. So once I make that identification, then I walk back. How do I make that identification? Well, the way that I have to make that identification is I have to have an extensive and exhaustive assessment of that client's environment. And that means at layer 2. That means subnets that I don't care what subnets they say they have, because I'm going to scan all the private subnets. I'm going to be looking for layer 2 devices that are unmanaged. I'm going to be using ICMP, SNMP, anything that I can run in that environment. I'm going to be exercising the firewall. I'm going to be doing an outside penetration test against their public IP. an inside vulnerability assessment against any public-facing assets. All of that takes time, and it takes resources and energy, but when we add an NLM to the question and we're able to truly identify what switches they have, how healthy are they, is everything locked down, can I access support I shouldn't be able to, are there devices that clearly are outside the basic VLAN of that organization, is there an access point that I can get to with a default password because somebody's plugged it in at the house or connected remotely. Here's the other thing we run into all the time. If I don't use an NLM, I'm not going to know about the 7 employees who VPN into the office using their home computer every day to work, specifically finance people. They're the ones that do it all the time. They connect to their home computer using the VPN and work on spreadsheets on their home machine. And if I didn't have an NLM, I wouldn't know those pieces and parts. And so it's those things that get me in trouble. It's not the basic scans. So once I've run the NLM, once I've completed that assessment, once I've gathered what I think is most critical, and by most critical, I mean violate some security principle and don't think the client knows about it because they didn't tell me. From there, then I build an infrastructure map. And that infrastructure map is because a decision maker is going to universally not be technical, and they're not going to understand what I'm trying to tell them unless I give them a basic graphical representation. Then I use that graphical map and the time spent doing the assessment. I bring that up to a pre-sales presentation that doesn't focus on here's how we're going to install this and here's the product we're going to use over here and we're going to use Sophos to do this thing, and nobody cares. They just don't. In my opinion, when we added NLM, we increased our close rates. And we did it because we found things that they didn't know were there that we needed to know were there. And so that builds equity with the decision maker. And even though we're more expensive, that built equity will often be the difference.
Terrific. Great points, all of them, frankly. Let me ask you a quick question on that front. So you approach a decision maker. Has there been times where you've turned down business as a result of that meeting?
Yeah, I turned down two opportunities. One, now just so you guys know, we do the same things everybody else does in that space. Just some of our clients are a little larger, 500, 1,000 endpoints. So we got an opportunity as a referral from one of our existing clients. We went in and ran an NLM. We did the full assessments. They had several thousand endpoints worldwide. And what I recognized from the NLM was they had offices they didn't even know about that users were VPNing, that weren't on the domain. And that's what we call shadow IT. I have to remove the shadow from shadow IT when you're doing an assessment, because you can bet your bottom dollar you'll be asked to protect it. And if you don't protect it, and the shadow IT is what causes a security incident, you'll be held accountable, period. So I have to be able to find it. And in doing this assessment for that organization, what I realized is they didn't know how much infrastructure they had. They didn't know where it was. They didn't have baseline security tools that told them what was going on within their organization. And I said to them, we will be happy to protect you with a SIM and an AV, which is what you originally called us about, or you got the referral about, because that's what I was providing to one of their partners, one of their friends. But we've got to do all of this underlying infrastructure work first to get you to a place where we can protect you. And if not, then I'm sorry, I'm afraid I can't do it. And the reasons are clear. If I took the deal and I charged them firewall rates and endpoint rates and switch, and I get a SIM and I get a SIM going, I get the AV going, I'm happy, I got a big client. Well, guess what? The number of incidents that I'm going to have to deal with, the number of problems that I'm going to have to deal with, immediately and continuously make that client an unprofitable enterprise. And it's just, I won't do it. And the other case was similar. It was a doctor's office, much smaller. and it came down to the fact that they had a bunch of retail stuff. They, and they had a bunch of layer 2 switches. And I'll tell you this, I haven't ever said this before except to some other friends of mine, but you can also tell how willing they are to invest in IT by what the NLM discovers. If the NLM discovers a bunch of layer 2 unmanaged switches and the NLM discovers, old Netgear switches that you don't know about or whatever, what does that tell me? That tells me that that particular institution is not willing to invest in the IT infrastructure to have mainline enterprise-grade products. And so why do I think they're going to spend any more money with me to get things where they should be and to help me be profitable? I'm just not going to do something for somebody if I can't make $1 at it. It's not worth it for me. And at the end of the day, it's not worth it for the client.
That's a terrific point. I mean, the ability to identify granularly the underlying infrastructure speaks volumes about the environment and the leadership of that environment relative to what one of their big pain points, price. So that's a terrific point. We're running a little bit short on time. I want to have some time for questions at the end. I have a few more slides, but one more question for you. When you do take on a client and you're using the NLM on an ongoing basis, would you consider that an invaluable element of your ongoing services, or do you just, as I talked about earlier, you just sort of run it once in a while?
NLM, at least for our case, I don't know about everybody else, but NLM, it's indispensable and it runs all the time. I have to know when somebody, particularly if they have any local IT at all, which these days becomes more and more common, or if somebody thinks they're an IT person, I have to know when somebody plugs something new into a switch. I have to know what it is, and I have to be able to examine it. I have to be able to know when they add a new layer 2 switch because they hired a new person and there isn't a drop. I have to know when somebody plugged in an access point and it's serving up a 192, 168 VLAN that I don't happen to be scanning. I have to know all those pieces and parts. And at the end of the day, every security event that we've helped triage and we've done forensics for, which that's some of the stuff that we do, we have discovered, of the last 5 that we've done, because they're closest to mine, 3 of those 5 could have been prevented had an NLM been in place, because it would have identified hardware was outside the scope of IT, and they would have been able to lock down that institution or that particular set of hardware. So I can't see a case where it's not indispensable. And that information that comes from an NLM is the beginning of your identification of a security issue, which is why folks like KPMG now won't complete an assessment without an NLM being in place. They won't complete an audit without it being in place.
Terrific. I really appreciate it, Jason. If you stay on to the end, we only have a few minutes left, but I want to give people a chance to ask questions. So would you mind staying for a few minutes?
No, it's fine. I got it. Let's do it.
All right, awesome. So I am going to bounce through these slides quick so we can get to questions. Only a couple left. Again, you're going to go in with 4-part execution plan. You're going to set a baseline. You're then going to identify and prioritize the environment the way it needs to be constructed, establish parameters for notification, alerting, normalization, threshold, in-band and out-of-band, perform the infrastructure reset. This is all the prelude to you having an ongoing security monitoring and management practice fully implemented for that client. It's important to remember, an NLM is not a check engine light. The check engine light comes on when the engine is in major distress. The key to an NLM is it's like having a heartbeat monitor. You want to know that the heart of the organization, the network that runs the business, and all of the assets that connect to it are healthy and performing optimally. If all you're doing is being reactive, like a check engine light is, you are doing your company and your client a disservice. An NLM is the heart monitor of the environment. I appreciate you guys attending the webinar. We'll give you in a moment an opportunity to ask any questions of myself or Jason for attending the webinar. We're going to give you a few things like we always do. Change management plan, a key element of when you do that infrastructure reset, you're going to want to get sign off. That plan is a terrific template. The impact analysis I talked about earlier, we're going to give that to you. We have a full marketing campaign called the Heart Monitor for your network. And then CyberGuard 360, these are the various platforms, our CyberGlass SIM 2.0, and our PII Guard, our breach prevention platform, are our Vanguard products. Happy to talk to you guys about it. Please reach out with those if you'd like to. If you have any questions, I know Colin's on with us. Please drop them below at the bottom. You can see where you can raise your hand, or there's a chat window if you want to ask any questions. I'll leave my contact information up here. Colin, any questions out there for us?
We had some come in, but I checked with the people who asked them. You had answered them throughout. There's just one left that I thought I would ask for them. For the purpose of
for me or Jason?
For either.
Either. Go ahead. Let's see. Let's go ahead.
Okay. For the purpose of risk assessments, is a network topology the same thing as a data flow diagram, or are there differences?
So, Jason, you want to take that first, the first crack? You want me to do that?
Yeah, an infrastructure diagram is not the same thing as a net flow diagram. A net flow or a data flow would indicate, as was offered by Al earlier, it would overlay on top of the infrastructure diagram. Just to keep I could go on and explain why, but time's short, so I'll just say it overlays on top of the basic infrastructure.
So, and to piggyback on top of that, he's absolutely right. And infrastructure says this is where everything is and how it's connected. Data flow says this is the path that data takes across that infrastructure to get to its destination, from inception to termination and back again. And so there is a difference. Any other questions out there?
One more came in through the finish line. This one for Jason.
Okay.
Jason, do you find that having NLM is a value add in prospects and upselling current clients?
It is a value. Somebody be careful how I respond to this. It is a value add in selling to new prospects for two reasons. One, because it's a differentiator between all the other guys doing assessments, and it helps me to build equity with the decision maker because I show a significant depth of knowledge of their environment so early on, and more than likely or not, I'm going to discover things that they may be unaware of. And so we have seen our close rates go up. I was talking with Al about this earlier because I bounce things off him on a regular basis, but I actually went back and looked when NLM came up as a part of a discussion. And since we've added NLM, if I look at our number of prospects, our sales funnel and close, our close rate's gone up by about 42 to 45%. That's a pretty conservative number. Looking at our sale, looking at our closing and before we had NLM. As far as upselling existing clients, it's a part of our core offering. We won't sell a security solution without it because we have to be able to protect them and protect us. So as a byproduct of its criticality, yes, we have to have it. There's just no question.
So I'm gonna juxtapose that. So we've got a lot of MSP partners that have, when they've employed an NLM, it is, as Jason himself said, it is a significant and substantial differentiator. And for all the reasons he said, when you walk in with a network map outlining everything they have, including that what they didn't know they have, you know more about their network than any other IT person they brought through that door, including the one that probably works there. And that is instant credibility in the conversation. You are an instant expert in the room because you know something that nobody else knew. You found something that nobody else could find. And more often than not, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, Jason, more often than not, you will find something they don't know.
Yeah, we rarely find something they're unaware of. The last thing that I will add is this statement has been true for me for a long time, and it's true today. He who builds the most equity with the decision maker through an expression of knowledge about their environment is a guy that will close a deal, price be damned. It's just a fact.
Absolutely. Jason, I really appreciate you joining today. You've been a terrific guest, wealth of information. I hope everybody got something out of this. As I said, we've got some things we're going to make sure that you get by end of business on Friday. Colin will take care of that. If you have any questions whatsoever, my contact information is up there on the screen, as well as our website and any other information you need. Please feel free to reach out. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Have a great day.